Welcome back to Bad Things in History, where we'd like to say thanks for hanging out with us and talking about history. Each state has made a unique and terrible contribution to the total sum of human misery. Some contribute more than others, such as New Jersey. For the past 200 years, it has been a favorite destination for accidents, violence, and negligence. The result has been an unbroken chain of unnecessary death and destruction. Our first story is about a president who died. Death of a president. In one case, New Jersey became a convenient place for the nation's leader to die. James Garfield was born in Moreland Hills, Ohio on November 19, 1831. He served as an officer during the Civil War. After the conflict ended, James Garfield became a politician. First, he served in the State Senate of Ohio. After a few years, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. On March 4, 1881, James Garfield became President of the United States. Although Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated just 16 years earlier, most politicians in Washington, D.C. thought it would never happen again. They weren't concerned about average citizens becoming assassins. Because of this belief, President Garfield didn't have guards when he traveled. Charles J. Guiteau was originally from Illinois. He was also delusional and became convinced that he was why James Garfield won the election. Then he started believing that Garfield would destroy the country, so he decided to kill the president. On July 2, 1881, President Garfield arrived at a train station. Charles waited unnoticed, approached the president, pulled out a revolver, and shot twice. Garfield was hit with both shots, once in the back and once in the arm. Unfortunately for James Garfield, his doctors didn't understand how infection worked. Their focus was almost entirely on removing the bullets, but they couldn't find the metal slugs. The doctors tried to locate them by sticking their unwashed hands into the bullet wounds and feeling around. It was excruciating for the president and also helped spread infection. But the journey to death was slow and painful. It was a scorching summer in Washington, D.C., which added to Garfield's discomfort. On September 5th, a decision was made to relocate him to Long Beach, New Jersey, where he could enjoy its cooler temperatures. The cottage where Garfield stayed was built in a single night by volunteers. He survived in his new home for 13 days, but at 10:30 p.m. on September 18th, James Garfield passed away. Charles Guiteau was sentenced to death for shooting the president. A month before being executed, he wrote a poem explaining that God told him to commit murder. He was hanged on June 30th, 1882. Hoboken Docks Fire. Because of an unfortunate and easily avoidable accident, hundreds of people in New Jersey met their end. In 1900, the North German Lloyd Shipping Company owned several docks in Hoboken, New Jersey. They had several ships tied to the dock. And on the wooden piers nearby, the company also had several bales of cotton. Not far from the cotton were barrels of oil. On the night of June 30th, the cotton burst into flames. The fire spread to the barrels of oil, which then exploded. This in turn spread fire to the piers and the ships tied to them. Several smaller vessels completely burned, but 3 large ocean liners also caught on fire. The crews on these ships tried to get away from the piers, but without tugboats to help move them, the large vessels were trapped. Most of those trapped below decks on the ocean liners couldn't escape. They perished in flames. Those who could jumped into the Hudson River to escape the fire. Most of them drowned. Several people made heroic attempts to rescue the survivors, but some of the tugboat operators were less enthusiastic about participating. There were reports that they refused to save people trapped in the water unless they could pay, and several tugboat operators were also unwilling to move the burning ships to safety without first receiving compensation. When the rescue efforts finished, 326 victims were dead. The destruction caused $10 million in damage, worth over $358 million today. The shipping company rebuilt its piers using more fire-resistant materials. Paterson Silk Strike. Life for textile workers was difficult in the early 1900s, and when it suddenly became worse, they went on strike. In the United States, most of the employees of the textile industry were from Eastern Europe. They were highly skilled and the workers' products were in high demand, but improvements in manufacturing started putting pressure on them. Wages began going down while production requirements increased. Labor movements popped up all over the country. Most were ineffective, but in 1912, textile workers in Lawrence, Massachusetts went on strike. The factory owners had to meet worker demands and increase wages. The immigrants who worked at a textile mill in Paterson, New Jersey, also began discussing striking. Their working conditions were dangerous. Children were also being used to perform hazardous jobs, and the daily production quota kept increasing. One of the reasons why workers were under such stress was due to improvements in loom technology. The new looms allowed workers to weave several fabrics at once. The traditional way of producing textiles was slower, more expensive, and couldn't compete. On February 25, 1913, the workers in Paterson went on strike. They demanded to be paid more for their labor. Many of the striking workers also demanded the removal of more efficient looms. The owners of the factory in Paterson refused to meet worker demands. The economics of the textile industry meant that there was no going back. The modern looms were here to stay, and the traditional way of creating textiles was gone forever. The strike finally ended on July 28th. SS Morro Castle. Dock fires weren't the only way for cruise ship passengers to die. In March 1930, work was completed on the SS Morro Castle. The vessel was enormous and could accommodate over 700 people. It was also equipped with the latest navigation technology. In August, the ship went into service and began carrying passengers. It departed from New York City and traveled to Havana, Cuba. After arriving in Cuba, the Morro Castle then returned to New York. It was a popular cruise route and remained profitable even during the Great Depression. Part of the reason why was due to alcohol prohibition. Once passengers were in international waters, they could drink and enjoy themselves, but the party wouldn't last forever. On September 5, 1934, the Morro Castle departed from Havana. The first day of the trip was uneventful. Early the next day, the ship reached the east coast of the United States. Then, dark clouds arrived and the wind started blowing harder. By September 7th, the Morro Castle was trapped in a powerful storm. Under normal conditions, it might not have been a problem, but a series of disastrous events would make a bad situation much worse. Early that evening, Captain Robert Wilmot decided to stay in his quarters. He had dinner delivered and began trying to eat it. The captain complained of stomach troubles not long after trying to consume the meal. Then he suddenly dropped dead from a massive heart attack. The chief officer took command of the vessel. At the same time, winds increased to over 30 miles per hour. At 2:50 a.m. on September 8th, the SS Morro Castle was 8 miles away from Long Beach Island off New Jersey's coast. A fire started in a storage locker and quickly spread to the rest of the ship. In just 20 minutes, the flames completely destroyed the electrical system. The lights went out, the engines stopped, and the radio couldn't send any requests for help. The cruise ship and its passengers were at the mercy of the storm. Attempts to evacuate the vessel were utterly chaotic. The crew launched 5 lifeboats, but Morro Castle actually carried 12 of them. Only 85 passengers made it to the lifeboats. For those who remained on the ship, there were very few choices. Some died from smoke inhalation, others grabbed life preservers and jumped into the water, but many didn't know how to use life preservers correctly and broke their necks upon hitting the water. Those who didn't die instantly were knocked unconscious and drowned. Nearby boats were slow to respond. When they did arrive, they didn't get close enough to see the victims. The large waves produced by the storm made it difficult to rescue anyone. Most of the ships that arrived to help simply turned around. Over the following several hours, radio stations reported the victims were washing up on the New Jersey shore. Local residents went to the beaches to collect the dead and help the living. Meanwhile, the SS Morro Castle, still engulfed in flames, drifted to shore near Asbury Park. In the end, 135 passengers and crew died during the disaster. An inquiry determined that the vessel's crew did not follow established procedures correctly. They also didn't have a plan to fight fires while at sea. Additionally, the luxurious interior of the cruise ship was very flammable. On March 27, 1935, a federal judge ruled that each victim was worth $2,225. That would be worth over $49,000 today. 3 plane crashes. Although plane crashes were more common in the past than today, they were still infrequent. and they usually didn't happen at the same place repeatedly. However, in the 1950s, Elizabeth, New Jersey would become the site of multiple aircraft disasters. On December 16, 1951, a Curtiss C-46 received clearance to take off from Newark. It was traveling to Tampa, Florida, but as the airplane passed over Elizabeth, the engine caught fire. It crashed into a building and burst into flames. The crash killed everyone on board, plus one person on the ground. On January 22, 1952, yet another airplane met its end. A Convair CV-240 left from Buffalo, New York. It was bringing passengers to Newark. However, the aircraft drifted off course. It crashed into an intersection in Elizabeth, killing everyone on the plane, plus 7 more victims on the ground. Investigators never determined why the plane lost control. It happened again less than a month later. On February 11, 1952, a Douglas DC-6 left Newark. It was carrying 62 passengers and crew to Miami. Soon after takeoff, a propeller failed. The plane crashed in Elizabeth, hitting an apartment building in the process. 29 passengers were killed, as well as 4 people near the apartments. After this last accident, the plane crashes finally stopped. Chemical control explosion. The city of Elizabeth was more than a fatal destination for aircraft and cruise ships. It was also home to hazardous chemicals. The city was next to Elizabeth River, which ran through several towns. Right next to the river was a toxic waste dump. The Chemical Control Company received a 5-year operating permit for the dump in 1972. It was supposed to use an incinerator to eliminate toxic waste. However, much of the waste disposal business in New Jersey was run by organized crime, and safety wasn't their primary concern. Barrels of toxic waste were delivered to the facility, but it couldn't keep up with demand, so in 1976 the facility owner began instructing employees to take barrels of toxic waste and dump them in various places throughout Elizabeth. After the first owner was sent to prison, a new owner took control. Instead of disposing of the barrels of toxic waste or incinerating them, he just let them accumulate. By 1979, over 50,000 barrels of toxic chemicals were at the incinerator plant. The site was condemned and an attempt was made to clean up the mess. Over the next year, 10,000 barrels containing nerve agents, explosives, and radioactive material were removed. The effort to remove the dangerous chemicals would not succeed. On April 21, 1980, a fire started at the chemical control facility. The flames sent a toxic mixture of chemicals into the air. The explosions also sent barrels of toxic waste flying into the sky. The flying barrels then exploded and released their contents upon the residents of Elizabeth. The fires were extinguished by the following morning, but the deadly chemicals settled into the soil and water all around the city. Nearly 15 million people were in danger due to the mismanagement of toxic waste. The Environmental Protection Agency declared the location to be a Superfund site. This meant the agency would begin a long-term effort to clean up the mess. Throughout the 1980s, the agency worked to clean the soil. It also tried to prevent the river from being exposed to additional contamination. As of 2019, the toxic waste site is considered to be safe. However, there are still hundreds of barrels of toxic waste stored there. The state of New Jersey has had a long and eventful history, and most of it is full of unnecessary suffering and needless death. What do you think about these troubling stories from the state's past? And did we miss anything you think was important? If so, let us know in the comments below. Your feedback is important to us. Plus, we always need new topics for future episodes. Every week, we fulfill our mission to teach you about the worst parts of humanity's past. Would you like to help us in return? If so, then please like this video, and it would be great if you watched another episode. These small acts on your part make it increasingly more difficult for YouTube to ignore our existence. As always, thank you for watching Bad Things in History.